Elimination Chamber should have been called Status Quo Chamber. Raquel Rodriguez was the most dominant woman in the match and still walked away without the win. Rhea Ripley punched her ticket to WrestleMania to face Jade Cargill, and dominance, that belonged to Raquel, eliminating two competitors at once and reminding everyone what real power looks like. And now here comes the uncomfortable part. Does Raquel stand by, smiling politely while Liv Morgan's feud with Stephanie Bigger plays out without her? Or does she finally decide she's done waiting for permission? Balor, meanwhile, lost cleanly to CM Punk, despite Michael Cole repeatedly reminding us that Dominic Mysterio and JD McDonough were in the building. There was no betrayal, no accidental interference, no Judgment Day fallout. Just Finn getting pinned and staring up at the lights. And that was the theme of this entire show. Outside of a bizarre Danhausen debut, Seth Rollins being revealed as the Masked Attacker, and Randy Orton winning the Men's Elimination Chamber by beating Cody Rhodes, nothing actually changed. Story didn't pivot, power structures didn't shift, and WrestleMania past stayed exactly where they already were. Elimination Chamber didn't create momentum tonight, it protected the status quo. Let's get into the Women's Elimination Chamber match, which was Rhea Ripley versus Kiana James versus Tiffany Stratton versus Alexa Bliss versus Asuka versus Raquel Rodriguez. Rhea Ripley wins the Women's Elimination Chamber by pinning Tiffany Stratton. And before we get to the end result, this match worked. It was hard-hitting, physical, and impactful, even though it felt a little short on time. Everyone had a role, and most of them executed it well. Kiana James, in particular, came out of this looking better than she went in. She was framed as an opportunist, capitalizing when Asuka missed it Alexa Bliss and pinning Alexa immediately after. That's smart booking. It told you exactly who Kiana is without overexposing her. But the real MVP of this match was big sexy Raquel Rodriguez. Raquel was the final entrant into the chamber, and she made every second count. The moment she entered, the tone shifted. She started wrecking everyone, slamming bodies into the chamber and the pods. She threw Tiffany Stratton into a running powerbomb against the pod and just overwhelming the field with raw strength. And she also laughed at Tiffany Stratton just getting hit into her pod as well, which was hilarious. And the visual of the night, Raquel hitting a Tejana bomb on Kiana James onto Asuka and pinning them both at the same time. That's the kind of moment people remember, which is why the finish is so frustrating. Despite all that dominance, Raquel is taken out by what is essentially a quick double team from Tiffany and Rhea, and then just pinned. There's no extended punishment, no war of attrition, just gone. And the crowd booed and deflated. And that's where the booking starts to wobble. Rhea Ripley continues this pattern of where she absorbs minimal offense, does very little in long stretches, and just plays dead, and still walks out as the winner in the end. It protects her aura, sure, but it comes at the expense of other people doing all the heavy lifting in the match, a Kiana James and an Asuka and a Raquel. If Raquel was going to lose, she should have been put down. Make her take finishers, make it feel earned. One quick double team doesn't match the story she just told. Alexa Bliss, meanwhile, barely got enough time to advance anything regarding Charlotte Flair, which makes her inclusion in the Elimination Chamber feel like more of a placeholder than a pivot point. And while the double elimination of Asuka and Kiana is a fantastic visual for Raquel, it doesn't really move the needle for either of them going forward. So yes, Rhea Ripley is heading to WrestleMania, but the woman who left the biggest impression tonight wasn't the winner. It was Raquel Rodriguez. Next up, we have Balor versus CM Punk for the World Heavyweight Championship. And CM Punk defeats Balor with the GTS. And the match itself, it was good. Technically solid, well-paced, nothing really wrong with it in isolation. But it fell flat because of the expectations the show itself created. We were told Dominic and JD McDonough were in the building. Michael Cole made sure we knew that on commentary. Then paused. He looked up the ramp. The camera lingered. We were expecting Dom and JD to pop up at any time. Everything about the presentation told us something or someone was coming. A betrayal, an accident, Judgment Day interference, intentional or not. And none of it happened. No Dom, no JD, no post-match attack on Punk, no attack on Finn. It was just a clean pin on Finn and a handshake. Now, yes, this further confirms Finn's babyface turn. That part is clear. But clarity isn't the same thing as momentum. This match didn't advance Finn's story, it stalled it, and when you tease chaos all night and deliver calm instead, it doesn't feel subversive, it feels deflating. Finn didn't lose because of Judgment Day, he didn't win in spite of them. It simply didn't matter, and that's the problem. Elimination Chamber quick hits. Before wrapping this up, a few quick hits from the rest of the show. AJ Lee defeated Becky Lynch to become the new Women's Intercontinental Champion. It's a significant title change, but it also reinforces the larger theme of the night, execution without disruption. Danhausen made his debut, and I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it. Chicago didn't exactly embrace him at the end, and that reaction matters. It didn't feel like a moment that immediately found its footing. Randy Orton won the men's Elimination Chamber by pinning Cody Rhodes. Seth Rollins was revealed as the masked mystery attacker, which answers a question but doesn't really open up a new one or progress anything forward. And Logan Paul got more eliminations than he needed, eliminating LA Knight, Javon Evans, and Trick Williams, a choice that felt more about spotlight allocation than story necessity. The real question coming out of the Elimination Chamber is this: what happens now with the Judgment Day? Both Raquel Rodriguez and Finn Bálor needed momentum heading into WrestleMania, and instead both came out of this PLE feeling stalled. Raquel is now staring down roughly 50 days of doing nothing, while Liv Morgan is locked into her feud with Stephanie McCure. So what is Raquel supposed to do in the meantime? Is she meant to seethe quietly in the background, back into Liv's bodyguard? Or worse, does she become Liv's attack dog against Stephanie, softening her up, a role that Dom had to do a couple of years ago? Because if Raquel isn't factored into Liv and Stephanie at WrestleMania, then neither she nor Dom should be a part of this build at all. This is a sink or swim time for Liv and Stephanie. If the WWE is not going to use the Judgment Day's history, heat, or internal tension to elevate that match, then the feud has to stand on its own, completely on its own, without borrowed muscle or interference. Dom shouldn't be translating, Raquel shouldn't be Liv's attack dog. And if Raquel continues to be sidelined, that only increases the chances of her costing Liv at WrestleMania, unless the WWE pivots and turns this into a three-way. So as of right now, Raquel isn't positioned as a threat. She's positioned as an unresolved consequence or for a future Liv to deal with. And speaking of unresolved consequences, Finn Balor. Finn's chances at a full face turn went up dramatically tonight. Yes, Finn wanted to do it alone. But that doesn't mean he won't feel a certain way about Dom and JD not helping him when the moment came. If the demented demon resurfaces, and if that darker edge starts creeping back in, there's a very real possibility that this ends exactly the same way it began. Finn gets taken out, a la Edge, via concerto, a betrayal, and Finn being kicked out of Judgment Day, mirroring what he did to Edge 3 years ago. That symmetry is sitting right there for the taking. And what to watch for? On Raw, we have Dom having an Intercontinental Championship match against Penta. With Finn coming off a loss and the possibility of Finn being positioned as Dom's WrestleMania opponent, all signs to point to Dom retaining. The key question isn't the result, is whether Finn reacts. Does he confront Dom, or does he start laying the groundwork for that inevitable fracture of the Judgment Day? As Liv Morgan and Stephanie procure, the path forward for them feels thin right now. Another attack, another confrontation, more heat without texture. Raquel could have added complexity to the story immediately. Instead, we're stuck waiting to see if the WWE realizes that. And finally, keep an eye on Roxanne Perez. If she's back on Monday, hopefully, she could help push the Judgment Day story forward, especially now that AJ Lee is the new Women's Intercontinental Champion. There are seeds here that can plant for a future challenge and set up that dream match. The question is whether the WWE actually plans them, or lets this division drift the same way it did at Elimination Chamber. Elimination Chamber gave us answers, just not ones that changed anything.